All right, thank you so much for joining us today for this month's installment of From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. We are joined today by Mariah Wollweber and Jake Westlin from the National Association of Wheat Growers. So you probably hear of it more often as NOG. And we asked them to join us today so we can talk a little bit about projects that NOG is working on. We are a partner. US Wheat is a partner with NOG, and Idaho Wheat is a partner as well. They do things that we can't as far as policy and lobbying, and I'll let them kind of talk about that. But I want to go ahead and have Mariah and Jake introduce yourselves. I also want to remind anyone listening that you can feel free to ask any questions during this entire episode. So you can either just unmute your microphone, you can use the reactions icon at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, or you can type your question into the chat and we'll make sure it gets asked. Mariah, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Brittany. So my name is Mariah Wollweber. I have been with NOG for 2 years now as their communications director, and I love it. I am originally a 5th generation wheat farmer from Washington State, so I have a lot of passion for the wheat industry and specifically the Pacific Northwest folks. So really excited to be here and talk about NOG and what we do. And Jake.
Thanks, Mariah. And my name is Jake Westlin. I'm Vice President of Policy and Communications with the National Association of Wheat Growers, or NOG. I've been here for just over 3.5 years now, and it's kind of flown by. But before that, I spent the bulk of my time in Washington, D.C. working in the United States Senate for North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp. I am originally from northern Minnesota, but I came to D.C. by way of North Dakota, and then also working on the Hill on ag policy for her tenure in the United States Senate. And I'm from a small town, have a lot of extended family who are involved in farming, so really am passionate about agriculture and happy to join the call today. I think Mariah's going to kick it off with some of our.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Brittany, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's great. I guess my first question is just, what is NOG? What do you do and why do you do it? And
absolutely.
How does the wheat industry as a whole support and benefit?
Sure. So for those of you who might not know, NOG is the primary representative in Washington, D.C. for wheat growers, and we work to ensure a better future for America's wheat growers, the industry as a whole, and the general public. So we work with a team of 20 wheat grower state associations. I see Jamie and Stacy here today, so they can kind of talk about that relationship. But so we work with those associations to benefit farmers across the entire nation. So I guess, what does this mean? Well, we're working with Congress to draft, create, or sustain policies that benefit wheat growers to the best of our ability. I always kind of like to compare NOG to Farm Bureau because a lot of growers and farmers can kind of relate to that. They understand Farm Bureau's mission, but instead of lobbying and advocating for multiple commodities and different ag aspects like Farm Bureau does, we approach everything with a very wheat specific lens. And that's super important because wheat is actually a very complicated crop, right? It's probably why it's my favorite and why I love it so much. But with 6 different varieties, different planting rotations, unique characteristics, diverse growing geographics, it's really critical to have a wheat expert here in DC lobbying on behalf of those wheat growers, talking about what works for wheat growers and maybe what doesn't work for wheat growers. So it's very important for us to be here doing that every year, but especially this year and in DC right now, because it's actually a Farm Bill year, and we've been working really hard on the 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization. And I can kind of go into that, Brittany, or if you I wanted to pause for any other questions.
No, that's great. We're all interested in the Farm Bill, so
yes,
go ahead with that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the Farm Bill is very, very topical. It's so important. It is an opportunity for Congress to address agricultural food and food issues. So actually we're working with the 118th Congress, and they have a ton of new members who've never voted on a farm bill. So it's really extra important that we're out here talking with them, working with them to help educate them on the bill, what it means, and why it's important for rural America, but honestly, all of America. So the 2018 Farm Bill, this passed with historic bipartisan support in both the House and Senate. We hope to see that again. Last summer, NOG put forward our Farm Bill priorities, and I'm sure it's to no one's surprise, this included protecting and enhancing crop insurance. This is our #1 priority. It is the ultimate safety net that we need to see again in this Farm Bill. But we also talk about increasing the reference price. So it's been $5.50, which this is not an adequate safety net for wheat production. This neither covers the cost of production or does it take into account input costs. So we've been advocating for this to increase to reflect the cost of production more accurately. But I also just think it's really important to note that NOG has amazing relationships and connections with people on the Hill. And one of the biggest ways that we can show that is looking back at our track record of testifying and actually getting a grower in front of Congress, sharing our story and having that voice. Dave Milligan, who's now our past president, he got to testify on carbon markets and sustainability and talk about what wheat is doing and why it's such a beneficial crop. And then Nicole testified 3 times on Title I, Title II, and Title III programs found in the Farm Bill, talking about what we hope to see in the Farm Bill and what's been beneficial and what's not. And we're anticipating our new president, Brent, for him to go in front of Congress several times and talk more about Farm Bill programs. This is also really Jake's area. He is like our lead policy expert, and so he can talk a little bit more on those policies and why they're important. So Jake, I'm just going to turn over to you if you have anything to add on Farm Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to Mariah's point there, we actually did receive the formal invitation today for Brent to testify before the House Agriculture Committee's General Farm Commodity and Risk Management and Credit subcommittee next week. So he will be in Washington, D.C. testifying Wednesday afternoon. It's a 2-parter. So half the commodity orgs will be in the morning, the other half it'll be 5 and 5, and the other half will be in the afternoon. So he'll be testifying on a hearing titled Producer Perspectives on the 2023 Farm Bill. So really underscoring a lot of what Mariah just talked about in why protecting crop insurance is important, why crop insurance should be strengthened, and why the reference price should be looked at and revisited as well, since that statutory one, as Mariah outlined, has been $5.50 since introduced in the 14 Farm Bill. And really, like, this next Congress there's a lot of education that needs to go into that. And we really have a lot of tools that we use and have used in the past from a grassroots perspective. And it's why being a grower organization is so important, and we have our state associations who have excellent networks and can really connect with growers. But we also, when there are things that come up that can impact either the industry as a whole or a regional, it's important to have a national voice as well. And these grassroots campaigns that we ran in the past have really helped prevent either bad policy or have helped enhance and get good policy across the finish line. So thinking about just going back to a couple of the ones that we ran in the past and one that we're running right now. In the past, we had a campaign when the reconciliation piece was moving through Congress and they were looking at revisiting stepped up basis. We ran a campaign where we had over 600 letters sent from wheat growers across the country to members of Congress on Capitol Hill about why that is bad policy and why that should be, those harmful tax provisions should be removed from what ultimately was the Inflation Reduction Act. So that was an important win for NOG just over a year ago. And additionally to that, we ran a campaign over the winter when we were encouraging Congress to move and act to prevent an anticipated rail strike. That would have had detrimental impacts across the industry and the economy as a whole. So hundreds of letters were sent in through our networks and with the help of growers in Idaho to help urge their members to act, which they ultimately did to prevent that strike. And right now we're running another one that's Farm Bill related, but related to our ask on increasing the funding for MAP and FMD, your market assistance program for a market development program. And that's critical for our friends at US Wheat Associates, because they are Wheat's cooperator organization in that public-private partnership. And our goal right now, we have bipartisan bicameral legislation that's been introduced in the House and the Senate that would double MAP and FMD. What our advocacy campaign is doing right now is we're encouraging new members, or members who have not yet signed on to those bills as co-sponsors or introduced that legislation, to encourage them to sign on to that legislation so that they hear strongly from agriculture, but also so the members, the ranking member and the chair of the House and Senate Ag committees, so they hear loudly from members of Congress that this is very broadly supportive in Congress. So if we are investing new money into the Farm Bill, we definitely need to be looking at investing that money in Title III, in MAP and FMD, because if you think about those programs like a pie, Congress hasn't increased MAP and FMD's mandatory money since the early 2000s when President Bush was president, and that pie through inflation has shrunk. And also the slices of the pie have gotten smaller because you have more cooperators participating in that program, which is a good thing. A lot of people recognize the value that MAP and FMD play and how it can help enhance their export opportunities internationally. Congress needs to be investing in those programs to support agriculture, to support our exports, because trade is such a bright spot with our national economy and on the global stage as well. So that is just one of the other campaigns that we are running. You can go to wheatworld.org, look under the policy tab. There's that campaign right there. And we always push that out in our internal communications as well, encouraging more growers to sign on. We'll keep that campaign running until the Farm Bill is done. So we will continue to beat that horse that long into the summer and fall. So those are just some of the grassroots stuff that NOG is working on. You mentioned projects earlier. I'd like to mention just like the life cycle assessment.
Well, before you get to that, Jake, I have a couple of questions for you on MAP and FMD. So you said, which is true, MAP and FMD haven't been increased since 2002, so more than 20 years. How much are you hoping for in the new farm?
I mean, the ask right now is to double that. That is what the broad coalition is looking at. Obviously, at the end of the day, a lot of that is going to depend on how some politicking plays out inside of Washington, D.C. That's our goal. That's what we need to have these programs be operating robustly and to address a lot of the need that is there. I think it's up to lawmakers to ultimately decide what the appetite is for increasing that, whether or not doubling is achievable goal or not. I think a lot of that's going to come into play as the Farm Bill and the debt ceiling negotiations kind of play out here over the next couple months. Okay,
and with the Farm Bill, we know that it gets revisited or renewed every 5 years, or is supposed to.
Yes.
It's oftentimes delayed, usually delayed, right? Not usually right on time for the 5 years. What do you expect?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. So we saw the 18 one, it passed during the year in which it was to expire, which means it was also late, but it was a couple months late. It got passed in December. It expires at the end of September, which is the fiscal year. When it's a short lapse, there's not a lot of issues that really come into fruition, but that really breaks down if it's drawn out for over a year where you don't have a reauthorization. That's when you go back to permanent law. But that's not what we want. And when what ultimately was the 2014, you had a series of 1 year extensions or even shorter than that, just because negotiations were so close and they just needed a little extra time. So they would kick the can a little bit more in that respect. With relation to the 2023 Farm Bill, all the four corners, I mean, are working. They say they're working towards an on-time or a Farm Bill this year. I think the September deadline is probably a little ambitious, but I think there's real opportunity to see something like we did in 18, to get something done by the year end or over the winter. But if you get beyond that, you do get into the 2024 election cycle, and it gets into a little bit of a silly season. So you don't really want to be trying to do what has historically been a bipartisan bill in the middle of a presidential election, in the middle of all these House and Senate races, because a third of the Senate is up every other year. The House is up every other year, all of them, all members. So I think there is a realistic opportunity. I guess the way I might characterize it is maybe optimistically, like, well, yeah, I'm optimistic about it, but I think there is some real chances that it could, be another 1-year extension or something to that degree. There's always that outside, there is always that opportunity that something breaks down. I think what level of new funding that might be able to be brought to the Farm Bill to some of the things that we were talking about a minute ago, MAP and FMD, reference price, that's an X factor that I think is yet to remain seen. So there's the Hill is still a little bit in listening mode. These hearings that I talked about and Mariah talked about, those are still like some fact-finding stuff, these producer perspectives on the 2023 Farm Bill. The committee really wants to hear from farmers about what the need is in agriculture. So that's really why it's important to kind of have our growers in town next week, or have our president in town next week, and then have growers continue to meet with their legislators when they're back in the district, or come to DC and meet with them as well to talk about how these programs are working for your operations, and then also what the need is in the Farm Bill. Like, why is it important for MAP and FMD to be increased? Why is it important to re-examine the reference price? Why is it important to protect crop insurance, and or find ways that we can potentially enhance it? Because if you look back since the 14 Farm Bill, there's been a lot of disaster assistance that's been ad hoc, and because that's not timely necessarily. And I mean, it's definitely has been helpful for producers, whether severe drought, but it's there's a lot of uncertainty when you go from ad hoc program to ad hoc program, and they're complex. The USDA has to stand those up every time there's a new tranche of money put out there, and they change drastically administration to administration, and there are always new rules and regulations that kind of get built into them. So there's a lot of uncertainty when you are standing up something that's outside the Farm Bill every other year or so.
Okay. Now, you started to talk about this, but the life cycle assessment, walk us through that. What is the point of that? Do other commodity groups also do a life cycle assessment? What made NOG decide that they needed, well, NOG and US Wheat decide that they needed to also conduct a life cycle assessment for wheat?
That's an excellent question. So a lot of commodity associations have done their own life cycle assessments. Corn, soy, other industries have done those. And a life cycle assessment, just taking it from a very high level at first, is like a life cycle assessment is a scientific method to assessing the environmental impacts associated with all stages of a product's life. So in this case, wheat, and we're doing it to the farm gate. So before it gets, to the farm gate. So NOG, we are partnering with the National Wheat Foundation and US Wheat Associates in conducting the life cycle assessment. And it's going to take a little while to get a lot of this data. Right now, a lot of this stuff is in information gathering mode and kind of further outlining parameters and stuff. So we hope to see some like maybe executive summary stuff either late this year or in the early part of 2024. But we are working with Texas A&M University and Colorado State University to help put that together, because this is it's a big project. There's a lot of data that goes into it, and it'll help the story, or help tell the story of wheat production, as I mentioned, and provide that credible analysis and the hard data that is needed. We are getting lots of questions from, I mean, sustainability, as you can imagine, is quite the buzzword inside the Beltway and across the country too. And food companies are looking at it, milling companies, Congress is looking at stuff, USDA is looking at stuff. So we need that hard data to kind of help tell our story. We know we have a good story to tell, and there's like, we know there's a good story to tell, and I see some questions in the chat, which I'll get to in just a second here. But with that increased focus on climate issues domestically and abroad, we don't see we see global food companies having a lot of interest in that, and potentially changing their course of action on climate, and having that credible information about US wheat production will help serve that function in the future as well. So I might just read a couple of the questions from the chat, Brittany. And
yeah, absolutely.
and Jim, I see yours, just to read it for folks who might be watching this down the road. Who are your key targets, customers for the life cycle assessment information? So the analysis will cover 4 key performance indicators: GHG emissions, energy use, water, land use. So those are some of the key metrics that we're looking at. And the customers, we're not selling it so much, we're using it from a policy perspective. So just communicating a lot of that stuff back to Capitol Hill, our food companies who might be asking questions about the sustainability of wheat at a national level. Corey, do you have a location on the life cycle assessment? I'm probably biased, but I'm pretty sure winter wheat crop on the loose following pulses, excuse me, is going to give us some great numbers. So it'll be aggregated to a national a wheat level. So we're not going to break it out by classes, at least. We will have that. I think we'd have that information, but that's not the intent, because we want to provide national whole level wheat data.
So how are you collecting? Do you have to collect samples to do that life cycle assessment?
Yeah.
How are you choosing your locations, and from where are you getting the samples?
Yeah, so I know right now, kind of like that's one of the parameters that we're looking through or working through, and just creating sort of sample farms to kind of get ideas of what goes into wheat production in this particular county that has a known wheat production. It's not going to use an individual's farm. It would be an example of a hypothetical farm in a particular region, and those would be aggregated across the country. So there'd be for an example, there would be let's say just 100 hypothetical farms that represent all growing regions from across the country where there is known and substantial wheat production. So they would utilize that data based on in talking with local agronomists about how and talking with local agronomists, and just using also USDA data that is known and other research that might be out there to kind of talk about those wheat production in those regions, and then that would be rolled into the sample of the data. So I know those locations have yet to be finalized, like the hypothetical farms, right? They're not so-and-so's farm. That's not the data set. It's going to be a data set based on kind of county type information.
And is that an ongoing study?
Yeah. So
after it's complete, how often do you renew it? Is it an annual thing every 5 years?
Yeah, it wouldn't be. Wouldn't anticipate it being annual, because it is such a big undertaking. It would likely, at this point, we're doing the one. I think we would have to revisit it after the first one, have discussions about the usefulness of the information, talk through that more. But I think it would be something that would need to be done periodically, definitely not annually. I don't think there's that would require a lot of bandwidth and resources to do an annual update. And I think I'd have to look at what some other industries have done, but I think it's a snapshot in time, right? So you'd want to kind of get every so many years, like every 5 years, for example, could be a useful metric, since that would provide fairly regular data.
I'll just go ahead and ask this question that just popped up to Jake and Mariah, if you want to jump in. Is the contrast with other crops important, or contrast with wheat production in other countries?
I would say that the contrast with other crops is important because it tells wheat's story. When we get asked about sustainability questions and the impact that wheat is having on the industry, having that hard data that we don't want to be, we're not better than corn or better than soy or anything by those means, but to be able to have that hard data to say, why is wheat so sustainable? Why is wheat such a great crop? How are we, what are we doing to benefit the environment? That's the data we need to tell that story. So in terms of wheat globally, I don't have a comment on that one. I might send that to Jake, but I definitely think having it specific to wheat is super important.
I'd have to circle back, because I don't know that, obviously we haven't done, this is our first wheat life cycle assessment here, and I don't know to what degree other countries in their industry associations might have done. So we'd have to circle back on that one.
Okay, and another question, how much political resistance is there to NOG or wheat industry priorities? And what is the best way, what are the best ways, I guess, in case there are multiple, to address that pushback?
And Matthew, you're talking about the Farm Bill, right? Yeah. So I think the biggest thing in terms of political resistance, and I think there's an understood need here, but I think the biggest resistance is dollars, right? So when we looked at the 14 Farm Bill, that was a significant reduction in terms of trying to find savings. But when we went into the 14 Farm Bill, or sorry, the 18 Farm Bill, excuse me, the baseline there was largely flat. There was some movement from some titles to the others to kind of, if you were looking at enhancing certain aspects, you would have to find cost savings in another. Right now, that's not where we're at. We're not. So our requests, so from NOG's perspective and several other commodity associations has been, we need to bring additional resources back to the Farm Bill to kind of not necessarily restore to the parity that was preceded the 2014 Farm Bill. But in the current fiscal climate, I think that is there's been resistance there in bringing new money to the Farm Bill. So recognizing our reference price increase that, or the MAP and FMD one, that's a hurdle, right? Is how do we bring new resources or reallocate within the Farm Bill resources to fund a reference price increase or to increase the funding for MAP and FMD. So that's one political resistance, and ways to address that is education. Like I mentioned earlier, we need to continue to have growers tell their story about production, tell them about what has changed since the 14 Farm Bill, which was a revolutionary Farm Bill. What has changed since that time that necessitates updating these programs? Because these dollar signs, like the reference price, that's been the same since 2014. There's a lot that's changed since then in terms of input costs, in terms of inflation, those indicators. So we need to be continuing to educate folks on that. The other priorities from our bucket, I mean, protecting crop insurance, that's something that we haven't really had any resistance to. And that's something that I think members who have been there for farm bills in the past 100% understand that. That is probably their, you get nods when you say like that's our number one goal. They're like, you're good there then. But I think to some of the newer ones, it's just educating them on what crop insurance is. There's new staff there. Hill staffers are pretty young by nature, so just continuing to like get them up to speed, because not all the staff has been there for a farm bill either. So there's just educating that I think is kind of the biggest thing that we're facing, and then dollars at the end of the day, new dollars.
I'm just going to piggyback off of Jake, education, but telling your story. I mean, my goodness, we say that time and time again. It's a dead buzzword, I know, but really it is so impactful. You want to get someone's attention, show them your diesel bill, your fertilizer bill. I mean, the dollars that you guys are working with are not relatable to the general public because they don't touch that. They don't see that. They don't understand that you're getting paid one time a year if your harvest is sellable because you had a good year. I mean, it is just so different and hard to understand this policy and what these people are voting on without getting to see it and hear from you and talk to you to actually know what's going on in your life. So it really comes down to education, but telling that story, letting them relate to you in ways that they otherwise would never have the opportunity to do that. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Mariah, do you want to take a stab at this next question that just came up in the chat?
I can take it.
Okay.
So Jim Peterson not continues to support the NWIC fly-in and lobbying for research funding. Thank you. What are current research funding priorities, and are you getting any traction on these? Excellent question. So the National Wheat Improvement Committee, NWIC, had its fly-in at the end of March. So a few weeks ago, we had about a dozen or so growers and researchers in Washington, D.C. talking about our appropriations requests for fiscal year 2024. And those are research requests in particular. So one of our requests was continued full funding for the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative. That's a Farm Bill authorized program, but it means you have to go back and ask for the dollars every other year. Whereas these other programs that we were talking about a moment ago are a lot largely mandatory programs. So you don't have to ask for, MAP and FMD to be funded every year. You need to protect it from cuts, but you need to, it's there unless Congress does something silly. But with these other ones, you have to, they have to fund them again every year. It's not mandatory, it's authorized. So number one, one of them was make sure the U.S. Wheat and Barley Scab Initiative is funded at its authorized level of $15 million. And it's been at 15 for several years now. So we had a great reception there. Another one of our priorities is continued funding for the Small Grains Genomic Initiative. And it's funded about $3.44 million annually. And so continuing to support that program. Those two, we had good reception there since that's not asking for new money. That's one that people always kind of are okay with. The other one that we were looking at, the National Wheat Improvement Committee is looking at standing up what's called a wheat resiliency initiative. Barley has their barley pests initiative, but this one kind of came about, I think, after barley was shipping that one. I wasn't there when it was developed, but that one hasn't been funded yet. It's a new program. It's not an authorized program, so we're asking appropriators. What we were asking appropriators for the other week was 1.6 million, and that would focus on two things. For starters, the long-term goal is to get this to about 5 million, so it can address a whole host of pest and disease challenges. But the two things that we would cover as part of this request, if funded, would be to increase support for wheat stem sawfly research. That's, I know, a thing in Montana, and it's historically, but it's grown outside of that historical region. Looking at, it's a big issue in Colorado as well, but also looking at increased support for research into Hessian fly, which impacts other regions as well. So that was another one of our research appropriations requests as well when we had our fly-in a few weeks back. So we had positive feedback on the new one because the concern we heard a year ago was the 5 million was a lot to ask for, so we needed to rethink that and reprioritize. So that's why we came back with 1.6 million ask. So we are hopeful that it might get into the Senate version, just because that's politically a little bit more feasible, and that was kind of also the message that we heard from the House Ag Approps subcommittee as well.
All right, I'm going to turn this last comment into a question for you, for either one of you. Would supporting a harder approach on crop insurance fraud and farm insurance rules be better received by the public and by politicians who may not know or understand as much about agriculture?
Yeah, I think there's always opportunities there to look at that. I think there are some tools in there that look at cracking down on fraud. I'd have to circle up with some of them, but I think those are always things that making sure that these programs are being delivered with the best use of taxpayer dollars in mind is some message that, or a message that is always going to be heard. I think on Capitol Hill is loud and clear, particularly in times where there's a lot of oversight and scrutiny of programs. Just making sure that those dollars that are going to their intended recipients is important.
All right, Mariah, how do we share NOG's efforts and mission and all of that with growers in Idaho? What resources can they look up so that they know what NOG is doing? Obviously, grower dollars from the commissions help support NOG's efforts. So we want to be able to report back and tell our growers exactly what their dollars are being used for.
One of the probably best resources that we have available is a weekly update that we send out every Thursday. You can sign up for it on our website, just wheatworld.org. It kind of does a recap of activities that NOG has been up to that week, and then also a government update of things that we're watching and somewhat involved in, just from an industry perspective. We also have a monthly podcast that just launched in September, and it, in my opinion, is very helpful. It honestly has covered every single thing we've talked about here today, what the Farm Bill is, what policies are we working on, the LCA, et cetera, to really help farmers and growers know about the work that NOG is doing. Also, social media is an easy way to follow along. We do try to stay up to date on pushing material that way of activities that we have been involved in. But I would say between the newsletter and the podcast, that's the best, because it really does deep dive in the internal nitty gritty stuff that NOG is doing. So that would be my recommendation.
All right, thank you. And Jamie Kress, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit here, if you can unmute your microphone.
Let's see how this goes in rural Power County.
Right. So Jamie Kress is an Idaho farmer in Power County. I'm sure most of you know she or her husband, Corey. Jamie was just recently elected to the NOG executive board. Jamie, talk to us a little bit. Why did you choose to do that? Why bring it back to Idaho growers on a really ground level reason for involvement in NOG and IGPA?
Yeah, I can do that. And I'm even going to pull over in the school bus turnaround right here, so that I don't disappear on this corner. So deciding to run for a NOG office was not an easy choice. It takes a lot of, the service itself takes a lot of time and commitment. And so it wasn't something that I took lightly, or that Corey, as we had those conversations together about how to make it work. It took a lot of time, but to come to this place. But ultimately, it was because my time working with NOG as an Idaho representative from IGPA, I was able to see the value in the work that NOG does every day. So as farmers, we have a lot of concerns on our mind and a lot of things that we are worried about, things that seem to be, and in many instances are out of our control politically. But we have a NOG staff who's working essentially 365 and sometimes 24 hours a day, watching out for us and protecting us. And in my time on that board of directors, it was very easy for me to see the value in the work that NOG does. It became very personal for me, though, during that time, as I began to see, and this isn't Idaho specific, but I began to be able to put faces to and relationships to stories. So I talk about a lot of our board of directors and the different things they faced, from droughts to natural disasters. We had a board member in Texas lose his entire farm as a tornado literally used Google Maps and found every nook and cranny of this man's life and obliterated it, right? And so it became for me that these growers around the country and the things they face, these are my friends, and these are real situations, and I know how much the grower voice matters. And so that ultimately is why I decided to throw my name in the hat and run for NOG office, because the work's important to me and I wanted to do what I could to help it continue.
All right, thank you. Well, we have hit our 30-minute mark, a little bit over, but I wanted to thank Jake and Mariah for joining us today. Mariah, do you have anything, or Jake, that you want to add at the end here?
I'm just going to add that we would encourage everyone to stay involved as much as they can and tell their story and help us with those campaigns that Jake went over. And I did want to give a shout out and thank to Clark Hamilton. He participated in NOG September Fly-In and did the roundtable with USDA officials. We had visits from the Four Corners, had some panels at the NOG office. We're really close to the Senate side on Capitol Hill. So we were able to get those speakers with relative ease. And I just think it was really important and awesome when people come in and participate in those activities. So just again, if you are involved in keeping up with the newsletter or podcast or anything like that, wheatworld.org.
All right, thank you. And I will put that website in the comments too, under the video on YouTube, and then also in the podcast profile. So for those of you who listened today and want to share this with friends or family or neighbors, we do post the recording of this from the field to our YouTube channel and our podcast channel. And both of those are Idaho Wheat. So you can, those will be up today or tomorrow. And also you can find them on our website at idahowheat.org. Share them as much as you would like to. And we will see you back here next month for our next From the Field. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.